Welcome to the Mother of All Mother of All Talkshows. We've lost one or two bells and whistles, as you've probably already realized. A new studio. We are in Moscow, and that may or may not be the reason why. But the show goes on, and what a show we've got for you this evening. It's been quite a week. I mean, Donald Trump may be like Mad King George talking to the trees in Hyde Park. He may be talking to the animals. Maybe the Gorilla Channel, which we learned today, he's an avid supporter of, although he fast forwards the bits where the gorillas are not fighting. And when they are fighting, he perches himself a couple of feet from the television screen and talks to the gorillas. This from a White House official from his first term. Whoever he's talking to, he isn't talking to the Iranian government. He is deceiving the markets. He's deceiving the oil markets, the stock market. He's deceiving everyone. And it's only a matter of time, perhaps, before he declares that Iran has broken off the talks, or he has broken off the talks, and has had to go straight to a landing of US Marines, of Rangers, of the 82nd Airborne. And if he does, it will make the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava look like a tea party. If he does, it'll look more like Iwo Jima. They're keen to conjure up the image of Iwo Jima when they talk about the conquering of the Karg Island, but they seldom tell the United States public that the US armed forces lost dead 26,000 men in conquering Iwo Jima. And they'll probably lose thousands of people if they embark on such a hair-brained scheme. It may, on the other hand, be that they'll make a landing on the coast of Iran, maybe and the Karg Island, in which case the Iranians have dramatically upped the stakes today by telling us what they'll do in return, which I can summarize thus. If the Americans land on Karg Island, it will sink into the sea. It will sink below the waterline. They'll make sure of that. Even though this would be devastating for their long-term economy, for them, this is not about the price of oil. This is an existential challenge to the continued existence, not just of the Islamic Revolution and the system they have achieved or built up for themselves, their own choice, after the overthrow of the Shah 47 years ago, but an existential threat to the country of Iran itself. It's very clear that the intention is to balkanize the current state of Iran into multiple states based on religion, based on ethnicity, try to make a new Yugoslavia of the former Islamic Republic of Iran. Anyone who loved Yugoslavia, like me, anyone who followed and fought against the breakup of Yugoslavia, like me, knows what comes next when a country is Yugoslavized. So Donald Trump may have some method in his madness. Whenever the markets are opening, he talks about peace. Whenever the markets are closed, particularly at weekends, for a long closure, the talk turns to war and the action turns to war. And so if I was going to predict, I hope very much that I am wrong, Trump will pull stumps on these bogus, non-existent talks by Friday night when the market has closed, and he will launch a military assault on Iran at that time, in which case all bets are off. But the sinking of Karg Island and everyone standing on it is only one part of the Iranian plan. Their Marines will storm into and onto the beaches of the United Arab Emirates and of Bahrain. That's right. There will be an actual invasion of these allies of the United States, and if possible, the overthrow of their governments. and the Iraqi resistance will invade Kuwait. Blimey, where did these last decades go? This is where I came in. The invasion of Kuwait, this time by irregulars, will, of course, turn not just the oil industry, but every industry into a big, giant slide. The facts are that the Iraqi resistance would conquer Kuwait just as easily as Saddam Hussein conquered it. Then, as now, the emir of Kuwait has already fled the country. He's in Saudi Arabia. The emir of Bahrain is in Saudi Arabia. Short drive across the causeway, but neither may ever return to their countries. All will change utterly if Trump goes on this madcap adventure. So if you are the mother or the lover or the mother or the wife or the sweetheart of any of these detachments of the US military, please know that there's a very high chance indeed that your man will not be returning, at least if he returns only in a box. So the situation is critical. Of course, we must hope that this doesn't happen, but the Iranians have been preparing for this day for 47 years. Their armed forces, their militias, and indeed their public have demonstrated over the last 3 weeks their fidelity to either their religion in many, many cases, or just their country in many, many other cases. As I pointed out to you before this war began, there are tens of millions of supporters of the Islamic system in Iran, and there are tens of millions of people who are what I call Iranian nationalists, patriots, who love their country and want to keep it together. When you fuse these two usually separate forces together, you have an unvanquishable population. That and the terrain of Iran, the mountains, the deserts, the kind of Vietnam forests that the United States found so difficult to quell when they last had a sojourn of this significance, will turn into a killing field for the United States of America. And the American public have to know this. In fact, all the signs are that they do know it. 61% of the US public opposes this war that Donald Trump, by choice, launched when he assassinated the leader of Iran and quickly followed it up with a double tap that killed at least 169 primary school girls at their desks in Minab. That massacre will never be forgotten, but the numbers involved will be dwarfed by what will happen if Trump now makes a move. We must hope, of course, that wiser counsel will prevail. We must hope that J.D. Vance, who has the opportunity to do it, his presidential poll ratings are now down at 18%. If he does not make a move against Donald Trump soon, he can kiss not just the presidency goodbye, but he can kiss the nomination to run for president goodbye. Marco Rubio has been stabbing him in the back since this administration began, and all the signs are that Trump favors Rubio over Vance. So if I were Vance, I'd definitely be beginning to talk with the other members of the Trump cabinet and to float the idea of a 25th Amendment move. The 25th Amendment allows those parties to inform the president that they no longer believe that he is in a fit condition to continue in his job. If they don't do it, the Republicans are toast. They may well already be toast. And the only bad news about that is it means that the loathsome Democratic Party, in every regard except manners and except diction, is very likely to storm back to power. And the war in Iran might stop, but war in Ukraine will undoubtedly be stepped up. So we are damned if they do, damned if they don't. But the situation on the ground or in the air has dramatically shifted in Iran's favor. Another American jet shot down today. Very complex American drone being brought down and presented to the world yesterday. The attrition of American military assets in the Gulf is phenomenal. They literally have not one extant military facility anywhere in the Persian Gulf, where once they strutted their stuff across the terrain of Qatar, of Saudi Arabia, of the United Arab Emirates, of Bahrain, and of Kuwait. Now they're not even there. They literally, in Saigon 2026, went running for their aircraft in order to get out. They had to do it quickly because they had achieved a truce with the irregular guerrilla forces, hundreds of thousands of them in Iraq, that if there was a 24-hour truce, they would withdraw all of their forces from Iraq. So for the first time since the end of the Gulf War II, first time since the beginning of Gulf War II, Iraq is now a free country. And the decolonization of West Asia is not restricted only to the Arab world. The Philippines today, after a decade of hostility towards China, proposed China's own policy as its policy so that they could jointly develop resources in the South China Sea. China's slogan throughout has been, put conflicts on hold, develop the South China Sea together. Well, miraculously, Mr. Marcos Jr. has agreed, and now amity, or at least the absence of enmity, may well break out in the South China Sea too. The whole disaster that Donald Trump has brought upon the world economy should not be underestimated. Everyone watching this has already and is about to suffer enormous economic and financial loss. And it's not just the oil. It's the oil and the fertilizer. It's the oil and the fertilizer and the gas. It's everything that comes down the Strait of Hormuz. It's everything that comes across the Red Sea, which means it's everything that comes through the Suez Canal. It's hard to overstate the level of economic disaster that is. Particularly, it must be said, for Europe. Europe, in the European Union, but also including Britain, has placed itself in a position that it cannot possibly escape from, having willfully, indeed kinetically, destroyed the possibility of having supplies of Russian gas. It now discovers that Qatar can't fill the gap. Qatar has declared force majeure and will not be able to fulfill its gas contracts as a result of the losses it has already suffered in its gas and other infrastructure. So no gas from Qatar, no gas of our own choosing from Russia equals no gas at all, because of course there is a limit to price increases. Price increases to a point where people can literally no longer afford to buy it. And price doesn't actually necessarily fall at that point. The oil and gas companies, meanwhile, are recording record profits. So it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. But perhaps the most significant cost for the United States empire is the plain visibility of its unwillingness to defend its allies, in the case of the Arab states in the Persian Gulf, its inability to defend its main ally, indeed I argue its 51st state, the Zionist state of Israel, is being hit 24/7, north, south, and in the center. Haifa and Dimona, again today. The Negev desert on fire. The pounding, now 4 times, of Israel's own nuclear weapons area in Dimona. Haifa, with its oil infrastructure and storage capacity completely destroyed. And Tel Aviv looking like Gaza. Now, I take no schadenfreude. I hate to see suffering of anyone. But when I see Israeli spokespeople complaining that Iran is hitting civilian targets, I honestly don't know whether to laugh or cry. When I hear the public in Israel, which cheered to the echo the systematic nuclear bomb type disaster that they inflicted on Gaza, complaining about the desert that their country is now becoming, their capital city is now becoming, I wonder at the complete lack of self-consciousness. And it isn't just Gaza. At the same time as Israel is being pulverized in an unprecedented wave after wave after wave of missile and drone attacks from Iran, the so-called settlers, I hate that word settler, these are coked up terrorists who are paid for everywhere. Everything about them is paid for by the United States taxpayer, are on a murderous pogrom. Britain was fixated for 3 days about an attack in London on 3 empty, clapped-out ambulances, an incident deplorable, shocking, especially if it was Mossad that did it, and not a single person suffered a single scratch, not even the synagogue next door to the ambulances. Nobody even threw a burning match into their grounds. Whilst Israel has slaughtered literally thousands of healthcare workers and hundreds of ambulance drivers in Gaza and in Lebanon and elsewhere, as a matter of deliberate policy. Now, this is a live case, the ambulance case. They tried to pin it on Iran, but the 2 men they've arrested were both British. And everyone is awaiting anxiously to hear their names. Because their names will tell us not everything, but at least something. The pogroms going on in the West Bank now are mass murder. They are mass destruction, mayhem, and mass murder. And nobody is doing a damned thing about it. So, with no bells and whistles this evening, no stings, nobody telling me what to do or when to say it, I welcome you to the Mother of All Talkshows. Here's the poll for the evening. Has Trump lost his Iran war? 48,000 people have already voted. You can vote on the Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on X, my X, on the YouTube community poll, on the YouTube stream, and if you are one of the vanguard, on patreon.com/George Galloway. Here's the question. Has Trump lost his Iran war? Yes or no? Big, big poll this evening in store. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in Britain and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Now, there are very few journalists anywhere in the entire world, and none in the United Kingdom, better than Kit Klarenberg. I spoke about Yugoslavia earlier, and I'm going to ask him about the auspicious anniversary this day. But I'd like to welcome him, first of all, as the man who got it up on Paul Mason, the ludicrous former Trotskyite turned military and intelligence asset of the state which he once toiled so hard to destroy. Kit Klarenberg, welcome back after quite some time to the Mother of All Talkshows. Great to see you. Just summarize, if you will, because I'm gleeful about it. I hope you are. Who is Paul Mason for the international organization, for the international audience? Who is he? What did he do? And how did you help unmask him?
Well, Paul Mason is a veteran British journalist who, for many, many years, worked for the BBC, worked for Channel 4. His star is rather faded now, and I fear that I'm giving him undue attention and even credibility by writing about him, which he certainly does not have. This is someone who, for many years, pretended to be a radical, tried to embed himself with supposedly revolutionary movements, including Syriza in Greece, and we see what happened there. And yes, styled himself as a radical with very left-wing politics, anti-war, etc. Was an early very prominent supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, spoke up in favour of Jeremy Corbyn, only to get caught on tape secretly claiming that he was trying to sabotage Corbyn and wanted to get rid of him in 2018, I believe. So questions about whether he's always been a snake or whether he's just lost his marbles in the twilight of his years have long abounded. Now, in the summer of 2022, we at the Grey Zone, we exposed how Mason was engaged in a secret, a unspoken conspiracy with sources within the British security state in order to target anti-war leftists, anti-NATO activists, journalists, academics, people who called for peace and peaceful coexistence with Russia. He was at the forefront of smearing them as useful idiots of the Kremlin and cowards, and invoking all sorts of historical allusions to Munich, etc. And he was doing that with at the direct behest of the British state. Now, I exposed this, and he wasn't very happy about it, and this contributed to me being detained for 5 hours and fingerprinted and DNA swabbed, and my digital devices strip searched the last time I returned to the UK in May 2023. I shan't be doing that again anytime soon, it must be said. My reporting on Inconvenient Truths led to an effective witch hunt of me specifically, but the Grey Zone more generally. Now, we at the Grey Zone have more recently reported on some very fascinating leaked emails that show, number one, Paul Mason was considering taking legal action against us and trying to get courts to impose a super injunction on our work. He was warned by his own lawyers that A, our work was very much in the public domain, in the public interest, B, that he had very little case and had all sorts of fantastical ideas about suing people who were mocking him, which were unlikely to go anywhere. Aaron Bastani compared him to Beria, and Mason wanted to sue over this hilariously, or maybe not so much. And yes, despite being told by his lawyers to leave it well alone and being warned that no court would want to take punitive measures against myself, or the Grey Zone in response to this, he was undeterred and sought a second opinion with none other than GCHQ, because that's what you do as a journalist with radical politics who's very much on the left, is that you consult sources of state repression and oppression to try and ruin the lives of independent journalists who write things that you don't like. So this went on for 18 months. He was feeding GCHQ information about me directly. I'm doing this, of course, in total secret. This was never meant to be exposed in any way. And this extended to him coordinating what he said about the supposed hack of his emails, supposedly by Russia, and when he said it. He was asked whether he could comment on particular developments, such as my aforementioned detention when I flew back into the UK. He was asked, he asked if he should comment on the British government formally accusing Russia of a long-running hacking campaign, and an article that he wrote claiming to be a victim of a Russian hack, and indeed rather insidiously suggesting that I, if not the rest of the grey zone, should be prosecuted under very draconian British counter-terror and national security laws. His contact at GCHQ patted him on the back, or indeed the head, after this was published, and said they hoped it was cathartic. If Paul did indeed feel catharsis for writing an article which he knew to have a false foundation, which was that he was hacked by Russia, no evidence of this has ever emerged because it's not true. It's very clear from the newly leaked correspondence that Paul Mason knew this wasn't true, as did GCHQ, but he ran with it anyway because it's a very effective means of maligning independent journalists, maligning their output as somehow disinformation or based on tainted material. But moreover, it's granted him license to threaten everyone from Owen Jones to Zach Polanski with 10 years in jail for simply talking about the Grey Zone's reporting on his leaked emails in social media. So I think this is, I'm feeling quite relieved and quite vindicated, given that Mason specifically wanted me to go to prison and be severely punished for the high crime of telling the truth, and was willing to go to enormous lengths to seek some degree of retribution against me, again, just for doing my job as a journalist. I feel relieved and vindicated, but also this is deeply, deeply disturbing. And I think that as Britain, the situation for anti-war independent dissident voices is ever shrinking. And as Britain kind of stumbles into potentially direct conflicts with Iran and Russia by token of playing a completely overt and unabashed role in facilitating and assisting these conflicts on the side of Ukraine and Israel, both proxy puppets of the highest order, who seem to be rather fond of each other, make of that what you will, then the prospect that things are going to get even worse and people will be hauled in off the street of major British cities due to false allegations they're working for Russia because they're holding a poster saying no to NATO funding or similar. That's becoming very, very real if we're not there already. And we have people like Paul Mason to thank, not only for encouraging the security and intelligence services to do this, but for many, many years, banging the drum about the need for the state to take action against quote-unquote extremists, which is, of course, anyone dissenting in any substantive way from established narratives and established policies.
Well, especially if they've got a big audience, as you do, and as some of us also do. So let that be the last word on the hated Paul Mason, the erstwhile Trotskyite turned state snitch. But the wider issue that you raise is, of course, far more important. I saw in the Dutch press, my wife was born in Amsterdam, I saw in the Dutch press this week an article which, the headline for which was that Russian spies may very well be people known to you. In other words, Russia, which has many other things on its plate, according to this Dutch newspaper, was recruiting people in the Netherlands who may very well be known to you. They may be your neighbor, they may be your workmate, but actually they are Russian spies. The fact that you say you will not be going back to Britain in a hurry, I had to say under my breath, ditto, because as you know, the same thing happened to me. I'm now living abroad in voluntary exile because I will not tolerate being treated in such a way in my own country. Craig Murray, our friend, your friend and mine, is in, I think, still in Venezuela and does his best to be as far away as possible from what is becoming a tyranny in Britain, a tyranny that arrests thousands of people for holding up placards, a tyranny that was ready to see non-violent civil disobedience activists die on hunger strike in defense of a law which has now been declared by the High Court as having been unlawful in the first place, and demanding bail, which was being denied, but which has now had to be granted. And right across the European Union, and the UK is probably in the vanguard, it's no longer safe to speak against your government. That's an irony, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think that we've been heading in this direction for a number of years. I think that you've been very full-throated and eloquent in your warning about precisely this coming to pass. It is a very, very frightening time to be on the right side of history. In the UK, the British state, despite the knockback of Palestine action, its prescription being found unlawful and being undone, although this of course pens an appeal trial or hearing. I mean, despite that setback, they're not going to stop. When I got detained in May 2023, there was widespread outcry, and I was quite shocked at the extent of the pushback. I didn't expect that at all. This was covered in the mainstream media in the US. The Hill, of all places, had me on to talk about it. Such was their outrage that Britain, of all places, could detain one of its own citizens on very sweeping and uncertain powers, and have their digital devices gone through and be forced to answer questions under threat of arrest and charge and severe penalties. Compelled speech is historically a very common feature of fascist societies, of course. And I thought that this might have a deterrent effect for the British state. I mean, imagine my naivety even at that stage. Since then, it's become an almost weekly occurrence that prominent journalists or academics or activists getting detained in exactly the same manner that we were. It wasn't a story for the British media in the first place, and their lack of interest has endured ever since, really. And of course, if it's not being spoken about in the mainstream, it may well as not be happening from the perspective of of elites in every field. But it is very worrying, and I fear that it's only going to get worse. It's gloves off, raw, unvarnished tyranny, as you say. And this is a dangerous period because elites know that to a large extent they're going to get away with doing this, that there's possibly at most going to be some condemnation on social media, and that's about it. There aren't going to be real world political or legal ramifications whatsoever. And that is a dangerous place for the general population to be in, and it's also a very dangerous place for governments to be in. I think that the long-term view is potentially optimistic. Repressive power structures always reach their most repressive when on the verge of collapse. We have to live through the interim period, which is, I'm sure we're going to start seeing more and more people being jailed for opposing war, for calling out Western lies on social media. We've had years and years and years of direct state censorship of major social media platforms. That's not worked in terms of totally silencing dissenting voices. Well, the next step is to start jailing people, and it will be justified on the grounds of national security. You mentioned Dutch officials talking about how your neighbor could be a Russian spy. I mean, this is wartime loose lips sink ships type mentality they're trying to inculcate in populations, and they're also going to justify all manner of autocratic, tyrannical actions. Detention without trial, warrantless raids were already there, as happened to Asa Winstanley, which was found to be completely illegal upon a judicial review, and I'm sure they'll just make it legal now. And like I say, I think that Britain is perilously close to being in all-out war territory, if not with Russia, then definitely with Iran. The level of British, even if it's relatively tacit, involvement in this is quite extraordinary. And also they know that they are under very, very serious threat. And in that context, the insane desire to do quote unquote something about this grows with ever greater intensity. And I mean, we see this is the Iran war now is a product of thinking that Iran was going to back down in 5 days due to some high altitude bombing. Apparently, the people in the Pentagon are not as clued up and well read as we are, George, because we've been warning, and you, as I pointed out before, almost 2 decades ago, were warning that this would be like Rorke's Drift or indeed Zulu without the happy ending from the West's perspective. And we're seeing that play out now in real time. Britain is not only directly assisting what's happening, but it's also in the firing line by token of its base in Cyprus, and other military and intelligence assets in the West Asia region. And not only is that damaging to British power and something that Britain is going to want to push back against, but also it raises all manner of uncomfortable questions for the British, namely that how can they possibly justify acting like a great power with a negligible fraction of the political, economic, and military power they once had, let alone the level necessary to even call yourself a midweight power in today's very new and very different world. The Prime Minister of Cyprus, in response to the threat of Iranian attacks on British bases in Cyprus, has explicitly stated that a conversation will need to be had about whether Britain's de facto occupation, not just of military and intelligence sites on the island, but the country itself, even if it is just indirect and rather unspoken, whether this needs to come to an end. That is the best part of 80 years since the British scurried away from formal rule of all of Cyprus in the 1940s. To today, that's not come up as an issue in the mainstream British media, let alone in mainstream Cypriot politics or media at all. It's just been off the agenda. Now it's been thrust onto the agenda, and a large number of people living in Cyprus who've never wanted the British there, have always wanted to kick them out, see this as a prize opportunity to do so at long last. So Britain, it's losing face rapidly by the day, perhaps not to the same extent that the US and Israel are, because the Britain is not visibly and admittedly directly involved in what's happening, but they clearly are heavily implicated, as I say. If they're going to be treated by their adversaries as if they're at war with them, then Britain might think, well, okay, why not? Given we're already in the firing line, and that's going to have absolutely spectacular, and indeed very catastrophic results. Not for people in power in Whitehall or the offices at MI6 or the Ministry of Defence, but there will be a hell to pay, a blowback.
Well, Donald Trump is discovering that right now. Just on the point about the freedom of the press and our ancient liberties, which were never as free as some people like to think, as I spent a lifetime pointing out, but at least they felt the need to claim that we were a free country, and they have abandoned, apparently, any need to try and persuade people of that. But every year the Foreign Office puts out a statement which reads, "Journalism is not a crime." They even did it when Julian Assange was languishing in the dungeon at Belmarsh prison. But they still do it every year, and yet this very week a British journalist of note, a good friend of mine, Steve Sweeney, was almost murdered on camera by an Israeli missile, and the British government could not even condemn it. The Russian government summoned the Israeli ambassador because Steve, who's worked for many television and newspaper outfits, was reporting from Lebanon for the Russian television company RT. And because of that, having seen live a British journalist of note almost being murdered He escaped by a whisker and was wounded in the process. The British government could not even bring themselves to condemn it. This is symptomatic of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes, well, I'm stunned that the media reported on Steve Sweeney's plight at all. I must stress that yes, I know Steve personally. I have done for a number of years. I in fact grew up reading him. And some of his work on NATO's destruction of Yugoslavia was very formative and influential in my early thinking and indeed journalism. This was absolutely astonishing. It was very clearly a direct, targeted strike. The Israeli officials did their usual thing of initially denying it to kind of offering some mealy-mouthed rationalization for why this happened. You can see for yourself that missile was headed straight for him, and it is a miracle, a legitimate miracle that he not only survived but was barely harmed. Now, the BBC, of course, in a shocking insult to Steve's fate, but also just a terrifyingly Orwellian use of language to conceal, as ever, Zionist crimes. This was reported and headlined as missile lands next to journalists. Who fired the missile, and the fact that it was very clearly intended to kill its target was unmentioned, and it's been promptly forgotten about. I must say that, to his enormous credit, Steve was back working within a few hours of this happening, having had shrapnel removed from his body, and I can't see any sign of him slowing down. So an inspiration to us all. Not just independent journalists, but people again on the right side of history and interested in exposing the truth. And yes, I think that we could all learn a thing or two from dear Steve. But yes, that we are the fact that this could happen at all is absolutely horrendous, and it speaks to the power of independent media, which I think a lot of people have a tendency to miss because of the ever ratcheting repression and censorship from every angle. The ability of people to influence minds independently now is really quite and also collectively is really quite extraordinary. We've seen this with the Gaza genocide. I'm old enough to remember the days of organizing pro-Palestine demonstrations or protests condemning in the harshest possible terms Israel's massacres of Gazans 10 years ago in London, and we were viciously attacked on the BBC, and other kind of mainstream imperial fora as agents of Tehran, as immigrants, as terrorist sympathizers, as anti-Semites. Those attacks and the utterly distorted, fantastical vision of Israel that existed in the minds of so many has been obliterated, and it shall never return. And there is a wider sense of an ending in the air in respect of Tel Aviv, amidst the smoke and the fog, the dust and the fires. Yes, there is a very clear inkling that we are nearing the end of the Zionist entity's life, long overdue.
Now, we've both mentioned Yugoslavia this evening because, of course, this is the anniversary of the defensive alliance, NATO, with no United Nations authority or even any attempt to obtain it, with no lawful authority of any kind. NATO bombed a European capital city, one I know and love. Belgrade was bombed repeatedly in the center of the town. The Chinese embassy was bombed in Belgrade. Trains were hit going over bridges. And of course, the television station in Belgrade was destroyed, murdering tea ladies and makeup girls, but was intended to put the state television then off the air. I'm older than you, but I saw then that this war on Yugoslavia was the shape of things to come, and that it would be the trailblazer for many subsequent wars, which of course it became. And under the leadership of the late and great Mr. Benn, we fought it tooth and nail in Parliament and on the streets, but we failed. Yugoslavia was broken up. People were slaughtered, many more maimed. And that should have been the end of NATO, shouldn't it? That should have been the end of the idea that NATO was any kind of defensive alliance.
Indeed, I mean, I've written extensively about the bombing of Yugoslavia, but I think that really that was the point that the unipolar world was forged in this incendiary baptism of airstrikes and atrocity propaganda. And I think that one of the most striking takeouts from I've reported on declassified British Ministry of Defence files from both during and after the war. And it's very, very clear that not only was while the bombing was ongoing, was it well understood that this was a total disaster, achieving absolutely nothing from a military perspective, but also that the Russians and the Chinese were disgusted and scared by what had been done to Yugoslavia completely illegally, without UN Security Council authorization, despite widespread international condemnation and domestic opposition. This was done. It was pushed for. Tony Blair was a personal advocate for targeting civilian sites, knowing that it would cause casualties, but believing this would be quote unquote worth the cost. That mindset has endured ever since. Kosovo was cited as an example of a successful humanitarian intervention. This has justified similar wars of aggression against defenseless countries the world over, but particularly in the Arab and Muslim world. The aforementioned declassified British Ministry of Defence files contain numerous references to how the Chinese and the Russians were intensely worried about what the US and its various vassals were doing, and indeed that Britain's quote-unquote forward position was noted and considered a cause of significant concern. Now, it was resolved at the time by British Ministry of Defence and Intelligence apparatchiks to try and allay Russia and Chinese fears that this would be used as a precedent for further action further down the line. Of course, it then was. So, as ever, the West demonstrated themselves to be pathological liars whose words are not worth the paper they're printed on, if they're printed on paper in the first place. So we can only imagine how this influenced Russian and Chinese thinking. I think to a large extent, the war in Ukraine is a direct product of the bombing of Yugoslavia. It was a very clear message from the Russians: this far and no further. We are not going to tolerate you expanding your economic and military and political tendrils across the world using blunt force by killing civilians. And we're going to push back this inexorable spread of US hegemony throughout the former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact and Yugoslavia. And Iran now seems to have joined that fight and is, quite possibly pushing the empire to its absolute and indeed final limit. I've written about all of the welter of the seemingly unforeseen in Brussels and Washington and London, but well known to people like us, George, the welter of absolutely destructive and damaging economic, political, and military upshots of this. This is the US at the absolute apex of its ambition, but also teetering on the brinks of collapse. It is seeking to expand yet further using force and finally bring the troublesome Islamic Republic to heel. And yet this is precisely at the time that its material foundations, to the extent they still exist, are at best in an absolutely parlous state, and at worst, are rapidly disintegrating. The US has become a victim of its own empire building, completely reliant on foreign countries for resources to sustain its own military. If the Strait of Hormuz remains fully closed much longer, we could see US planes dropping out of the sky, which we are already seeing, of course, courtesy of the Iranians. We could see the entire US Navy crippled. Again, we seem to be getting there. So Iran holds all the cards on this. They are righting historical wrongs. We see the missiles which are dedicated to Rachel Corrie, an American pro-Palestine activist who was killed, murdered deliberately by the Zionist entity and crushed with a bulldozer. I think that a lot of chickens are coming home to roost now. And if you want to put a marker on the, as I say, the very start of the US empire and the very end, it would begin in Yugoslavia and it would end in Tehran.
Yeah. Amen. A very famous Chinese leader once said, sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. That seems to me like what's happening now. Kit Klarenberg, another tour de force. Thank you very much for joining us on the Mother of All Talkshows. And I understand my bells and whistles are back. So let me take a quick break. And I'll see you very shortly. Stay tuned. There's a legend on the line in Oklahoma. It's May on Trump. Welcome back, May.
Trump is using a magic 8-ball to make his decision. He apparently has completely lost whatever mind he had to begin with. This is just ridiculous. Does he really think anyone's going to believe that? I'm here to say, and I'm here to join you and everybody else, the emperor has no clothes on. He's as naked as they come. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure he got naked with some young people. And that is why he so desperately is trying to kill this whole Epstein thing. And he's just making it worse.
I'm wondering when Donald Trump knew that he was implicated in these Epstein files and what it was that he knew. That's the big question, because he wouldn't have been banging the Epstein drum all this time and then suddenly to pull the rug. That tells me that it was a late decision, that someone came late to Trump to say, you really don't want to be doing that.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Well, the poll is going crazy. Almost 60,000 people have voted already. Has Trump lost his Iran war? I must say by a very, very large majority. Everyone agrees with Kit Klarenberg that they have. But the quantum will be important. Let's make this a very big opinion poll. Indeed, has Trump lost his Iran war? Let's make this a record. On line 3, from the lovely island of Jersey, is Graham. I've no idea what Graham wants to talk about, but I'm delighted that he's on the line. Graham, how can I help?
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Can you hear me?
Good evening. Yes, very clear.
Hello?
Yes, very clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much indeed. I believe that you were 7 times elected to Parliament, so many congratulations for this fantastic achievement. Only a handful of politicians have ever reached this degree of parliamentary success, so well done to you. Now, I watched your program some time ago, and some months ago, when you and your wife arrived at Gatwick Airport, I believe from Moscow, you both suffered the ultimate indignity and humiliation of being taken into police custody and being questioned by armed British police and having all your electronic devices confiscated. Now, you and your wife were held by the police for a total, I believe, of approximately 9 hours. Now, this was a disgrace for a man of such political achievement and must have been a horrifying experience for you and your wife. Now, Mr. Galloway, it is ironic that at present there are more than 2,000 British, I call them mercenaries, soldiers serving in the Israeli military, the IDF. And whenever they return on leave to the UK, so far not one has been interviewed at any of the main or provincial UK airports regarding their complicity and involvement with this apartheid and genocidal fascist regime called Israel. If I just may, on another matter, Mr. Galloway, recently, I think it was on either Turkish TV or Al Jazeera, I heard that when bombs from Iran started dropping on Tel Aviv and Haifa, citizens of Israel rushed to the bomb shelters, but when Palestinians sought refuge and safety, they were refused entry because they were told that Arabs were not allowed to share this shelter with Israelis. I find this totally disgraceful, but that is the apartheid state of Israel.
Yes, it is. It is. Not only were Palestinians, not only were Arabs refused access to the air raid shelters, Indian citizens were refused access. Black Israelis from Ethiopia were refused access. This racism that permeates, drives, fuels the apartheid state has to be seen to be believed. I mean, I was, Graham, an underground participant in the freedom struggle in South Africa during apartheid. And racism was, of course, abundant and everywhere and fundamental. But South African racism had nothing compared to Israeli racism, even against different types of Jews. But thank you for remembering the ordeal of my wife and myself. I was feeling it very keenly while talking to Kit Klarenberg, not least because I'm now back in Moscow. And if I were to go back to Britain after this visit, the same thing would undoubtedly happen to me. Even though I'm 71 years old, even though I have a heart condition, even though I was 7 times elected to Parliament, 3 times outside of the mainstream political parties, defeating the Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, and so on. Not only am I one of the best known people in the country, not only do I have the biggest audience of any person in the country. I mean, our ratings are now getting on for Morecambe and Wise ratings. Nobody has ratings in Britain like us. Even though I had been in Moscow attending in Nizhny Novgorod, not a meeting of the Kremlin. I didn't meet a single Russian official, not one single Russian official, because I was in Russia to attend the World Festival of Youth. The only people I met were young people from all over the world. And that happened to us, exactly as you described it. And it broke my heart because I didn't expect it. I knew it had happened to Kit. I knew it had happened to Craig Murray. I knew it had happened to other people, but I never expected that it would happen to me. I share a record with Winston Churchill. He and I, the only 2 people in British history to represent 4 different cities in the British House of Commons. And so if I'm not free of being arrested by armed officers under the terrorism laws, in which my wife was questioned about the Palestinian flag on her fingernail, if I am not off limits to this kind of tyrannical behavior, nobody is. If it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. And if it happened to me, it could happen again to me. And I told the officer that day, my wife will now leave the country, because she didn't even want to come to Britain. She turned down your passport. She turned down your citizenship. She's an anti-imperialist person from Asia. And you have just driven her out of our country. And the 3 British children that we have together will also be driven out of Britain. And if my wife and children have been driven out of Britain, that means I have also been driven out of Britain. After 50 years of prominence in the British political system. So to hear you so beautifully, if I may say, pay tribute to that and to the ordeal that we suffered was very moving for me, which is probably by now obvious. Thank you very much indeed, Graham in Jersey. Has Trump lost his Iran war? I need your votes. I want to make this a record poll that cannot be ignored. Now, we can't make this show on Fresh Air. We have no sponsor. We have no advertisements. We rely on you and on the social media earnings that are driven by your audience. You're watching the show, but mainly we need you to donate. We need you to donate to support the Mother of All Talkshows through our website, which is moats.tv. It's very easy to do. There's a donate button there. Just go to moats.tv and click on donations. You can also, of course, support the show through patreon.com/George Galloway. So a big thanks to tonight's big donors. These things keep disappearing off my screen. And the top of the pops tonight so far are Asia Kashmiri, Davy Begg, Simon Allen, Will and Lisa Roddy, good friends of mine. It will not take a minute to do it. Please give at moats.tv. Let's go to the English mainland, where Eddie is in Huddersfield on Iran. Eddie, welcome, mate.
Thank you very much, George, and thanks for taking my call. And I want to make a very important point about Iran, but prior to that, could I just say that you are a beacon of light in a media of sea of lies and obfuscation, and we need your party to flourish here, because there's no left in Britain, as was highlighted by your conversation with Klarenberg just a few minutes ago. However, I've been following many of the people you've had on your program, like Scott Ritter, and I've followed Scott Ritter since 2002. I've followed other people that you have on your show, as I say, but they all seem to be talking about Donald Trump as the problem, or Israel as the problem, when in fact, if you look at a document that was published by the Brookings Institution in 2009, it's called Which Path to Persia. The heading of Chapter 5 says, "Leave it to Bibi. Allow or encourage Netanyahu to attack Iran, which will then justify the American empire to go in behind it." And that's been the plan all along. And if you look at the document, it's all laid out. Every strand of what's happened up until now is laid out there in that document. So Donald Trump is just the front guy, like all the other presidents. The American empire, the deep state there, has a plan which is designed. They are at the moment, they're basically racist. And they hate the very idea that the Chinese, some yellow people, might overtake them as the leading power in the world. And they're not prepared to tolerate that.
Yeah.
And they've surrounded China and the US with military bases. They've got 80 military bases, as you well know. Now, the point is that this attack on Iran is merely the latest one. They've got the proxy war in Ukraine, which is designed to drain Russia of its resources. So they want to attack Iran and Russia, but China is the main object in this. And Donald Trump, the continuous reference to Trump's war is misleading, and it's very unfortunate that people are doing that.
Well, no, I was with you right up until that last point that you made, and I'll explain why in a minute. But that was a very powerful, indeed professorial call, and I hope it won't be your last one. My party, the Workers' Party of Britain, is poised to win a significant number of council seats in just a few weeks' time, and I think we've got a real chance of winning seats in the Scottish Parliament elections on the same day in May. And our base is not far from you in Huddersfield, Eddie. So my first request is that you make contact with us and join the party, because you would have made a cracking candidate in the town of Huddersfield. But the point that you made for the greater part of your remarks is absolutely correct. We could go back a lot farther than the Brookings Institute. Britain occupied Iran. Britain was an occupation force in Iran in order that we could steal their oil. And then when they elected in the 1952 a prime minister, Dr. Mossadegh, not an Ayatollah, not an Islamist, a socialist, they elected as their prime minister Dr. Mossadegh, who promptly brought Iranian oil into public ownership, owned by the Iranian people. It was hitherto owned by BP, British Petroleum. The clue was in the name. And Mossadegh made it IP, Iran Petroleum. And Britain and the United States promptly organized a coup and overthrew him and executed his foreign minister, whose widow I later came to know, having met her in a tea room in Harrods of fond memory. And Mrs. Fatemi was a living witness to these events. Her husband was executed by firing squad because he was regarded as a threat after the overthrow of Mossadegh of a return to democratic and socialist values in Iran. We could, of course, go back to Joe Biden. No need to go back to the 50s. Joe Biden committed war crimes on a monumental scale. So did Barack Obama. So did. So you're right. Donald Trump is not uniquely the problem, and this war against Iran is not uniquely the problem, but they happen to be happening right now. And agitationally, of course we must focus on Trump. Agitationally, we must focus on the unprovoked sneak attack during negotiations against Iran, because that's what people are seeing on their news. But you're right, we have to generalize from that specific president and that specific war to a general critique of imperial war and all the people, everyone who have been the figurehead of it to a greater or lesser extent. I have a view that Jack Kennedy could have been different. I have a view that Jack Kennedy, for example, tried his best to save the life of Patrice Lumumba, whose university is here in Moscow, the only Patrice Lumumba university anywhere in the world. I believe that Kennedy would have sought peaceful coexistence if he had been given the lifetime to do it. But since 1963 in Dealey Plaza, the United States has been naked in tooth and claw, and its most recent incarnation is merely the most vulgar, which is helpful, by the way. If Kamala Harris had been doing this to Iran, they'd be dressing it up in women's rights clothes. They'd be dressing it up in DEI terms. They'd be painting rainbows on it. And it would have been harder to turn most of the world against what Trump is doing if it were, instead of Trump, Kamala Harris that was doing it. Terrific call, Eddie in Huddersfield, and we've got an even more terrific guest coming up, Rania Khalek. Stay tuned, you don't want to miss her. I'll be right back. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
You've got half an hour still to vote on the poll. Has Trump lost his Iran war? Well, not if you believe him, but then anybody that believes him, I've got a bridge I could sell them in London, going cheap. Get voting on Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community poll, YouTube stream, and on Patreon. Well, now over 60,000 people have voted in this poll. Rania Khalek, one of our most enjoyed guests. She's one of our most popular contributors. She has special expertise in the Middle East, but she knows her international politics in the round, and I'm very glad that she joins us now. She's a journalist and the host of Dispatches on Breakthrough News. Rania, welcome back to the Mother of All Talk Shows. If I may ask you to begin with the situation in Lebanon, which is becoming ever more critical, and which proportionally is even more bloody than the American and Israeli attack on Iran. Lebanon is a tiny country, and well over 1,000 people have already been killed, many thousands wounded, and 1 million people displaced. 1 million in a country of around 5 million are now displaced people, making it the country in the world with the largest number of displaced people in it. If you wouldn't mind, tell us what the up-to-date situation is in the Lebanon and what you expect to happen next.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out, George. You're absolutely right. In Lebanon, the ratio of those who've been killed has been higher, considering the population of Lebanon is so tiny. And like you said, over 1,000 killed, and we're entering the 4th week now, 118 of them children. And you have also, on top of that, Israel has intentionally attacked medical facilities, 128 health facilities damaged or destroyed, at least 40, probably more as of now, because I imagine that number's gone up since I last checked, but 40 medical workers have been killed by the Israelis, many of them in double tap strikes, displacing 25% of the population. And you had yesterday the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, say that the displaced Shias of the south of Lebanon will not return until he says they can. And he's also talking about occupying southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. You have Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, talking about also annexing southern Lebanon up to the Litani River and making the Litani River Israel's new northern border. So this is not, they say it's about Hezbollah. It's not about Hezbollah. It's actually about Israel territorially expanding because it's an expansionist, supremacist state, and that's what it does. And the situation in the country is horrific. There's displaced people sleeping all over the place in the streets. The government has not done a very good job taking care of them. And I know you've been watching the situation in Lebanon too, George. You understand a bit about Lebanon internally, and you see that the government of Lebanon right now is made up of people who are quite subservient to the Americans and are trying to normalize, make quote unquote peace with the Israelis while the country is being attacked as a whole. And they're talking about trying to disarm Hezbollah at a time when Hezbollah is the only thing standing in the way of an Israeli occupation of Lebanon. They're currently trying to invade the country that I'm sitting in. And they've just been terrorizing everybody. They've been invoking the Gaza model. A couple weeks ago, I was in Beirut when the Israelis dropped leaflets over Beirut, and one of those leaflets threatened to turn Lebanon into Gaza. And you have the defense minister of Israel, as well as its prime minister, yesterday giving the orders to basically use the Gaza model in the border villages of the south and raze them to the ground so that Israel can occupy and nobody can return. And you've also got, by the way, George, Jewish Israeli settler groups that are already renaming villages in the south in this ambition to take over at some point and have Israeli Jewish settlers living in the south of Lebanon to replace the indigenous population, and buying and selling southern Lebanese land amongst themselves, which is just completely insane. But this is what Israel exists for. They want to turn the south of Lebanon into what they've done in Gaza and the West Bank.
It's bizarre. They denied doing what we saw them doing in Gaza, but they're dropping leaflets in Lebanon threatening to turn Lebanon into Gaza. But the resistance are going toe-to-toe with them on the ground, aren't they? And Israel's finding progress slow and bloody. So the resistance haven't gone away,
Of course not. And George, it's interesting because after 2024, there was the 2-month-long war in Lebanon, and then there was the ceasefire, right? This quote unquote ceasefire, because we know that in those 15 months of ceasefire, Hezbollah ceased its fire, didn't fire a single bullet at the Israelis, and Israel violated the ceasefire. It's almost comical, George, over 15,000 times. Documented by the UN and the Lebanese government. They bombed Lebanon almost every single day, killed over 370 people. So when Hezbollah entered this war on March 2nd, this regional war with Iran, between the US and Israel and Iran, it was a retaliation for those ceasefire violations that Israel had been engaging in for 15 months, and the Lebanese government had done nothing to protect its people in the south or really to condemn. So all that's to say now, I think in 2024, after that war, most people thought, especially the analysts and think tankers in Washington, D.C., had written Hezbollah off as defeated. And it did seem to some degree that Hezbollah had experienced a sort of loss in 2024. I mean, their entire senior leadership was decapitated by the Israelis. The pager attacks left them quite disoriented. And it's amazing they were able to hold off the Israeli invasion in those 2 months. But they were, I would say, given what we've seen over the last 3 weeks, Hezbollah is actually seemingly in better shape in 2026 than it was in 2024. And so far, they have successfully held off an Israeli invasion. We see the Israelis doing these raids where they go into a village and then they leave because they can't hold it. And Hezbollah has managed to destroy many tanks, has managed to put a lot of Israeli soldiers in pain. And, you know, they made a big gamble by joining this sort of regional war, but the idea being that this is the war to end all wars in this region and to sort of reestablish deterrence. And if the Iranians come out in a position of strength and Hezbollah can hold off this invasion, the Iranians are saying that they will absolutely be including in their conditions for ending this war, not just a ceasefire in Lebanon, but Israeli withdrawal and no more Israeli bombings of Lebanon.
Of course, Hezbollah is a major threat to the settlements of the north. The biggest settlement, Kiryat Shimona, I saw the mayor of Kiryat Shimona literally crying on television this evening, on screen anyway, this evening, and cursing Netanyahu for his failure to protect these illegal settlers. But the problem of the Lebanese resistance is nothing as compared to the impact of Iran's pulverizing attacks on Israel. How do you think Israeli society is reacting to those? It's now 24/7 for over 3 weeks. It's day and night, and it's in every conceivable part of the settler state.
Yeah, I mean, we can see from their own media that their society is not happy with having to live in shelters. Not all of them actually have, can get to their shelters in time. And we've seen, for the very little that's come out of Israel, because let's not forget, Israel has a military censor that's quite strong. So they get to decide what the media publishes and what it doesn't. So we actually don't know the extent of the damage in Israel. But from the little that we've seen, these Iranian missiles are no joke. When they make impact, they destroy buildings. And so, the Israelis are not used to this kind of pain. They're used to dealing with non-state actors who don't have ballistic missiles like Hezbollah and Hamas, right? Although Hezbollah has quite strong weaponry compared to Hamas, but still nothing like a state like Iran can build. Iran has these cluster munitions, these ballistic missiles. Some weapons we're not even clear exactly what they are, but they've been able to do quite a bit of damage. But I would caution against thinking that perhaps the pain that Iran inflicts will make the Israelis call it off, because I think, George, Israeli society seems to be high on war and high on killing everybody around them, just annihilating everyone around them and turning everything into an apocalyptic moonscape. I think future historians and maybe psychologists and sociologists will study Israeli society for its unique penchant for exacting death and destruction towards all of its neighbors, despite what the impact on them is. So I think what we'll have to essentially make Israel stop won't be its own government or its people. I think it's going to be the United States having to kind of cry uncle because the Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz and are essentially holding the global economy hostage to this American aggression. I just don't have very much faith that Israeli society can be deterred by feeling a little bit of pain. But maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? I might be proven wrong.
No, I think you're not wrong. A surgeon cannot operate on his own foot, and it's going to take the abandonment of Israel by its patron-in-chief and the many patrons in the European Union and in the West in general. But I've been surprised by Iran. Have you? I interviewed Professor Morandi and many others over a long time in the run-up to this. I knew that they were capable of giving a good account of themselves from the 12-day war, but I didn't expect them to achieve aerial supremacy over Israel, and that they very definitely have. So the United States may very well have to cry uncle on Israel's behalf, or there might be nothing left of Israel.
Yeah, I think we were all a bit surprised. I mean, I actually had the same thought you did. I've interviewed Professor Morandi several times over the last few years. And I think that we all sort of like joked a little bit at some point after months and months and maybe a year went by before the Iranians, gave us True Promise 3, was it? Like it became kind of a running joke in the region. Yeah. The Iranians are all talk but no action kind of situation, because they would make these big, bold threats and then you wouldn't see them follow through. And I think that's because the Iranians were very restrained, almost to a fault, for so long, because they wanted to avoid this very outcome, because they knew that this very outcome would be all-out war across the region. But, the U.S., it just shows you, because the Iranians are so restrained, the opposite of how the U.S. has always described them, the U.S. and the Israelis put them in a corner. I mean, you bomb this country twice in the midst of negotiations and then decapitate the entire senior leadership of a sovereign, recognized country. I mean, this is unprecedented. So this is an existential fight for the Iranians, and they understand that they have to pull out all the stops. And it's, interestingly enough, the people who were some of the more restrained voices in Iran in terms of no, let's avoid escalation, are some of the very people that the Americans and Israelis have killed. And so, now those who are in charge of Iran, again, pushed into a corner, and they're not going to go down without a fight. And in fact, I think they have definitely, I've been absolutely surprised to see the Iranians able to puncture through this Israeli 5-layer air defense system that my tax dollars pay for. It's been quite the sight. And also to see the Gulf states, just how vulnerable all these Gulf monarchies and their economies actually are. And to see how much leverage the Iranians actually have. And I think it's definitely a testament to the fact that, you don't take on a country, a very well-organized, ancient civilization of over 90 million people and be dumb enough to think you can do it in 5 days. It just shows the incompetence of the people in charge in Tel Aviv and Washington.
Well, let's turn to the incompetence in charge of your country, the United States. Either Donald Trump is talking to someone, though the Iranians completely deny it. Either he got a present or he didn't get a present, and what that present was, he couldn't tell us. Either he's talking to the mirror or to the trees, or he's bluffing and is about to launch a land invasion at the weekend, most likely. Which of these two options do you think it is? Is Trump genuinely trying to get out of this now? Or is it all a ruse to fool the markets during the day and during the week, and then to launch what might turn out to be the biggest military disaster, not just since Vietnam, but ever for the United States of America?
George, my personal take is the latter. I think that this is a ruse to calm the markets, like you said. And given the actions, I mean, we have to look at the actions of what Trump is doing. I mean, he's sending more military reinforcements, and he's sending actual troops to the region. He sent troops 2 weeks, I think almost 2 weeks ago, or 10 days ago. They should be arriving this weekend, Marines, and there's more on their way. So I think that this suggests a very stupid attempt to try to secure Karg Island or the Strait of Hormuz. And exactly like you said, I think it's going to be an absolute military disaster. People who are significantly smarter than I am about how military maneuvers function and about the geography of Iran and about what's possible have said as much. But from what we've seen from Donald Trump, I mean, he keeps escalating. He keeps digging in. He's too, I think, arrogant and obsessed with the idea of winning to admit defeat. And any end to this right now is essentially admitting defeat, although that defeat's going to be even bigger the longer he goes in. And it sounds like from what the Iranians are saying, they welcome the attempt to invade. Go ahead. See how it goes, buddy. I mean, Israel can barely hold a village in South Lebanon, despite all of its military supremacy on the ground, and it shares a border with Lebanon, right? We're talking about a country on the other side of the world. The U.S. is going to send reinforcements to that has very mountainous terrain and well-guarded islands, and anything you throw into the Strait of Hormuz is going to be shot at or mined or killed. So it's baffling. It's utterly baffling. But I think that we're going to see, especially what we see with people coming out of Congress who've been briefed by the Trump administration, they seem to believe very strongly that there's going to be some sort of ground invasion attempt.
Is he mad, or is there method in his madness, do you think? I must say he comes across as increasingly mad, but one imagines if he literally was mad, someone would take his keys away, but no one is seriously attempting that.
You know, I think he's a bit mad. I think he's high on his own supply, if you will. You know, according to a recent report, he's being briefed by the people around him every day by just showing him the big, you know, videos of big strikes in Iran to make him feel good like he's winning. I don't think he actually knows the extent of the losses. He's surrounded himself by yes men in true dictatorial fashion, by the way. No, but you know, the only voices of restraint in the administration aren't even willing to demonstrate to him that this should be restrained. People like J.D. Vance, because they're cowards. So yeah, Trump is surrounded by yes men, and people like Lindsey Graham are in the driver's seat, by the way. Don't forget this lunatic who represents South Carolina, but just wants to send all of the people he represents to go die on the other side of the world because he's a complete mad human being. But all that's to say, and then you've got Netanyahu whispering sweet nothings into Trump's ear as well. So he's surrounded by neocons and Likudniks, same thing kind of. But, you know, at the end of the day, he also, you know, Trump needs some sort of victory narrative, and he's not getting one, and the Iranians aren't letting him have one. And his conditions are also still ridiculous. You saw the 15 conditions that were released today. It's like acting as though there's been no war and Iran has no leverage, asking for the same things they were asking for before the war started, as if they're the ones in a position of strength. The Americans are in a position of weakness, and I think Trump is going to, you know, they're going to have to take a bigger beating before they realize that they have to cry uncle.
Well, the world watchers, not just fixated, but of course feeling the pain themselves. The economic costs of all of this are not just counted in the costs of the military hardware that's getting shot out of the sky, the aircraft carriers that are limping back to Crete, but the oil and gas price and everything that depends on that, which is basically everything, is now feeding its way into the economic system in Western countries and may not leave for many years.
Yeah, I would say that the lunatics who are running this absurd criminal war against Iran are dragging us all to hell. All of this is completely unnecessary. It's to satiate the, you know, chest thumping and bloodlust of these psychos who are in charge of American empire. And like you said, I mean, this is literally going to impact people in ways they don't quite realize yet. We're starting to see the beginnings of it with like gas queues in places like India. I think I saw the Philippines was starting to ration fuel. A lot of global South countries, of course, are going to be affected significantly. But, you know, these people in the European countries and in America, they think they're immune from it. They're not going to be immune from it. Maybe they won't hurt as hard as Africa and West Asia and Latin America, but they're still going to hurt. And, you know, I think these rulers in the West who think they're going to be insulated from it have another thing coming, because there's going to be social unrest when the inflation and all the sort of downstream impacts of what's not even reversible anymore, by the way. The longer the Strait of Hormuz is like essentially closed, the less reversible any of this is for years to come. We're in a new era right now that, again, the Americans and Israelis have dragged us into these rogue nations. And, you know, I am concerned, George, about the use of nuclear weapons here. I hope that doesn't happen. But all of this, you know, one of the reasons given, of the many reasons given for why this war of aggression took place, was stopping Iran from getting a nuke. Iran doesn't have a nuke. Iran wasn't planning to get a nuke. You know who does have nuclear weapons? The Americans and Israelis. Israel is the only country in the Middle East to have nuclear weapons. And they're a psychotic nation that's demonstrated for the last 2.5 years that they're perfectly comfortable with carrying out mass extermination. So I'm very concerned about a country like that using a nuke to get their way. And also the Americans are the only country in the world to have actually used a nuclear weapon. So, I mean, the stakes here are quite high. We'll see what happens. I hope it doesn't come to that. But again, these two countries are dragging the rest of us to hell.
Yeah, I mean, even if that happened, that would not, of course, be the end of it. Nuclear radiation doesn't respect boundaries. All of these satrapies in the Gulf that have been so generous to the Trump family would become unlivable in the aftermath of, the blast would hit Tehran, but everything else, including the nuclear winter that would follow, would blight the entire region, as well as change the terms of trade, politically and militarily, for the rest of time. The Americans dropped that nuclear bomb before the lifetime of almost everybody watching this. There will be a few, but it has dimmed, not least because the Japanese never bring it up. But for in 2026 to watch the aftermath of an Israeli nuclear attack on Iran would change everything in the world, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nuclear winter is no joke. This would be like a world-destroying, horrific event if it were to take place. And, you mentioned the Gulf countries. I do want to say, George, these Gulf monarchies have really also, it's bewildering to watch. The Americans are essentially using them as cannon fodder and human shields to protect their bases in the region. This entire security arrangement was supposed to protect the Gulf countries, and it's been the opposite. It's the Gulf countries and the people who live in them basically acting again as human shields for American bases across the Gulf. And despite the Americans demonstrating that they don't give a crap about these countries, they will use them as human shields for American bases and for the Israelis, they're still doubling down. You've got the UAE and the Saudis talking about potentially joining this disastrous war, making themselves even bigger targets. And for what? To fight alongside a genocidal apartheid state in its mommy and daddy America? It's honestly, it's embarrassing. And then to look at the Lebanese government watching this play out, watching what it means right now in real time to be an American ally in the region, which again, cannon fodder and human shields for American assets, and then begging the Americans, let us please join the club. God, what an embarrassing region to live in right now.
Rania Khalek, you're a superstar. Thanks for joining us again on the Mother of All Talkshows. Let me take a quick break because there's a legend on the line. May in Oklahoma, right up next. Stay tuned. My grandson, Sean, who's answering the phones tonight, had his first 1 million view tweet about Gaza, and I predict great things from him. So we're not going to go away. We believe in the next life. We believe that we will all be judged on what we did in this life, and that will determine our fate. And so we face whatever we have to face, if not with equanimity. Can't say that the experience was one that one can feel sanguine about. It was genuinely horrific, and I'll never forget it. It was the more horrific for being unexpected by me. I never believed that someone like me, of my age and with my background and with my position in British politics, would ever be told that I was being held under the Terrorism Act. I'm not unmoved by it, but I'm certainly undeterred by it.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
It's the legend herself in Oklahoma. It's May. Welcome back, May.
Hey, George. How's my dear hero?
Well, the better for hearing from you, my dear. What would you want to say?
Thank you. Well, I had a couple things I wanted to say. First, I want to say, jokers to the left of me, traitors to the right. I was stuck in the middle with you, George. I'm so happy about that. I'm also not worried about the fertilizer.
There's many of us.
I'm not worried about the fertilizer shortage because God knows our government spreads plenty of it everywhere. And then finally, I wanted to say, the last time I talked to you, I had a technical difficulty, and I dropped off. And I'm sorry about that. But I wanted to thank you because right after that, a guy came on thinking I was serious about Trump being appointed by Jesus to start Armageddon. And you very kindly told him, no, we know her. She was being ironic. And I was so grateful for that. But I want to.
People say that it's. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just have one last thing to say. I just want to say your best qualities are courage, intelligence, passion, honesty, and sincerity, and your eternal fight against the country now known at our house as is rubble.
Thank you very much for that. By the grace of God, as long as I have breath, I'll continue the fight. And then, as you know, I have 6 children and a young wife who will take up the reins after I'm gone. Beautiful call, as always, May in Oklahoma. She's not called a legend for nothing. Now, Moat's big donors tonight. Here's the roll call, the wall of fame tonight. But have you made a donation to the show yet? Please do it, either now or right at the end of the show, moats.tv. So the names up in lights right now are Jonathan King, Alec Pringle, Mustafa Afshari, Altanya Femi, and a huge thanks to Mr. or Mrs. Glass. It is James Glass, who is a weekly donor, but who donates so assiduously and with such generosity that as a weekly donor, he is in the mega donor class. And without James and people like him, we simply can't broadcast twice a week. And if you see the numbers of the people that are watching us, our episode 351 on the 1st of March has been watched, all or in part, by 17.9 million people. And last Sunday was a bit disappointing. It was only 12 million people. So there's a demand for this show. There's a need for this show. But we can't do this show, at least not twice a week, unless you give generously. Moats.tv. Let's hear from El Walid in Canada on the Iran trajectory. El Walid, welcome. What do you want to say?
Hi, Mr. George. Nice at last to be in your show.
Thank you.
I am a Sudanese doctor. I lived the Sudanese war before the separation of Sudan, and I was on the battlefield. I was also politically detained, and literally in the time when there is no idols, I considered you one of my idols, and I just have too few thoughts, if I can say. First, for the poll that you have, that did the U.S. lose the war? I think already the U.S. lost the war, but what's going on now, I think the American empire itself will be ended by maximum 6 months with this trajectory. If you look at the guard of the Strait of Hormuz, I think it's more stronger than a nuclear bomb now, because this is stopping the whole trade for the world, and this is only 1 month. If it's even for the U.S. to exceed and go with the war and the more devastation, that's not gonna help the Strait of Hormuz. It's gonna shut it completely. So
Completely,
they don't
yeah.
have, yes, and that they don't have this card. And this card, even a nuclear bomb is not going to finish it. Because even if you nuke Iran, there is nothing you can do about the Hormuz Strait. It will be still closed by a small ship, by mines, by everything they can do. And then the second time, the other thing they didn't calculate is the Gulf area. The whole Gulf oil is done now. Their money, which supports the whole American empire finance, is gone. And it's going to go more worse if they extend it in that. So that's the first. So I don't think that even the U.S. can stand this. And if the U.S. try to do anything, the whole globe is going to lose it. So there is no end to this.
Well, that's it's an extraordinarily powerful narrative that you describe. I happen to share it in every particular. Of course, it depends on the size of the nuclear weapon. But if it's a small nuclear weapon, it will not finish the war. It will merely make the war unfinishable. The war will continue forever. The allies, strategic partners of Iran, Russia and China, will be forced to reevaluate their entire approach to the American empire in the wake of such an atrocity which would kill hundreds of thousands of people in 1 second. And then in the radiation and in the nuclear winter that would follow, would kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions more. But it still wouldn't stop the war, as you rightly say. The Yemenis have not spoken yet. The Red Sea is not closed yet, but it will be the very instant that Donald Trump lands paratroopers or sends onto the beaches the U.S. Marine Corps. And of course, the radicalization that will occur, not just across the region, but across the whole world, of a 2026 use of a nuclear bomb that incinerates and then gives cancer to, life-ending cancer to hundreds of thousands of people, irrespective of which side of the Gulf they're on, what viewpoint they've got. The whole region will become uninhabitable. And the radicalization effect of that is likely to be very extreme. So that's why I put to Rania that this would be a world-changing event. And it still wouldn't finish the war. It still wouldn't finish the challenge to American hegemony. In fact, it would make it even more intense. Thank you for the beautiful call and the beautiful words that you said. I'm deeply touched by them. Now, on the podcast, we are this week in the top 10 for politics. Get this, in Liberia, Uruguay, Pakistan, and Jamaica. And the top 20 for politics, for the second week running, in Russia, Senegal, Chile, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. Top 20 in Russia. Now, I'm here in Russia, and one of my tasks is to get more Russian viewers for this show. Let's see if we can move up the charts there. You can download the Moats podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. Please give it a try. Ken is in the United States, wants to talk about US and Iran. Ken, welcome.
Hello, George. I have two questions for you. Okay, the first question that we have is, our Senator Lindsey Graham has said that we have to put boots on the ground in Iran. The first question is this: how do we do that, and what will the casualty rate for that be?
Well, think Iwo Jima. 26,000 American dead because the Japanese invaders were determined to fight to the last man. The Iranians are not invaders. They are facing an invasion. They are on their own land and they intend to die on it. So the proportionate losses that will be suffered by the United States will be of an Iwo Jima dimension. How it can be done is presumably an amphibious landing, though the United States has never successfully conducted an amphibious landing on the scale that this would require since Normandy in D-Day in 1944. Not anywhere, not at any time. Or parachute of the 82nd Airborne. Now, I watched the drilling that the paratroopers were doing for such a landing just earlier this day. And I've got to tell you, if that's the way they intend to land, not by parachute, but down one of these cables with the helicopters hovering, almost all of them will be killed. The helicopters will be blown out of the sky, and everyone in or dangling from one of these helicopters will be destroyed. They are grotesquely underestimating, as George Bush would say, the determination of the people of Iran to fight them. The second point, Ken?
My second question, George, is this. Has Bibi been resurrected?
I believe that Netanyahu is dead and that a very sophisticated but ultimately flawed AI attempt to achieve the modern equivalent, the AI equivalent of El Cid, who they strapped to his horse to pretend he was still alive, to rally the troops on the final charge. That's what's being done with Netanyahu. I can't prove it, but if I had time, which I don't, I could point to the myriad of mistakes and not just mistakes, but deliberate falsifications that have been revealed by clever people who know these things very well in the AI videos that have been described, whether it's disappearing rings, whether it's the never-ending cup of coffee, that no matter how you hold it, it doesn't spill, no matter how big a drink you take from it, it doesn't go down, to frankly embarrassing attempts like his picnic 50 miles from Jerusalem in the middle of a war. We have not seen him in unarguable life. And here's another reason why I think he's dead. Donald Trump now never mentions him. Even Donald Trump is not so stupid as to talk about Benjamin Netanyahu if he knows that he's dead. Ken, I've got to let you go because there's another legend on the line. It's the one and only Erobos in New York. Erobos, welcome back. It's been some time.
Salubrious salutations and felicitations. Not for lack of trying. You know, the audience on YouTube last Sunday exceeded 30,000. You know, it was, remarkable even to get the phones ringing. Sure. You know, so shout out as usual to Clan Galloway, the magnificent Jaya, well planted in life, first of her name. And I also want to thank, I've been remiss of this, but I also want to send a special shout out to the people who donate because they make it possible for those like myself that are unable to actually get on the air. Because I'm old enough to remember the Galloway show when it was just you, a wall, Mrs. G, and a sort of highlighted sign a neon sign behind you that said something to the effect of, "Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough." So it was just you and the camera and that. So I'm old enough to remember that. And then to come back to Moats, where you can interact with us and have guests and all of that is really absolutely worth it. So, a shout out, a big time salute to the callers. I just wanted to say something about Iran, my perspective on that succinctly, and the campaign talk of last week on Al-Quds Day. So, I'll be honest, I've been stressed and depressed a long time, ever since I engaged with, because you mentioned Yugoslavia earlier. That was my first cold water, ice bucket challenge to the brain of snapping me awake for a lot of times when I realized that NATO is evil, and so is the United Snakes, and all the rest of these countries. There was no reason, from the outside looking in to destroy Yugoslavia, but they did it, right? And they laughed about it. They violated their own rules, and they've continued with the Sprignus, Brzezinski, rump state, breaking up states and all of that ever since. And I've just been embittered and angry and depressed for so long, and then Iran decides to stop playing games, and, as I've always mentioned, the world that I want to see, as economic populist with socialist, affections, I know it's going to require a tremendous amount of blood, because that's the way all major changes occur. There's no peaceful end to a vicious empire. They just don't, sign some papers, shake some hands, and then, okay, it's your empire now. People are going to have to die, unfortunately, in order for this new world to be born. The monsters Gramsci has spoken about. And, because time is always against us, as Morpheus said to Neo in my favorite film of all time, The Matrix, I'll just mention, I watched the campaign talk of last week. I didn't know anything about Al-Quds Day, and when I digged into it, I realized it was the Ayatollah Khamenei, who, as soon as they got to power, he did it in the name of Palestine. So right away, even before they got to power, Palestine was like at the top of their mind, apartheid, South Africa, and these other places. So they've been in the struggle and the fight from the very beginning, and I think, to sort of harp on the excellent guest, the magnificent Kit Klarenberg, and especially with Rania Khalek, that I think they've had, they sort of acted like Colossus' feet of clay, with a lot of these things that should have been done a long time, which probably would have prevented, this buildup of arrogance and craziness now. So I learned a lot watching the Al-Quds Day, and Bob Villain was a great surprise. But I'll tell you, and I'll finish with this. I saw Sean the Steadfast, Galloway, I guess making his debut, and I was looking at him, and I'm saying, this guy looks very, very familiar. I never, I just couldn't pin it down, and then I nailed it. Lester Joseph Gills, who people may be familiar with as Babyface Nelson, born in 1908, it must be said. If you could see a clear picture of him, is like a spitting image, a doppelganger to the American gangster, bank robber, and the guy who still holds the record for laying down the most FBI, giving dirt naps to the most FBI agents. So he's like a reincarnation of this guy, but he came through the Galloway clan this time. So shout outs to him. And even though I know you have designated, all are the redoubtable, to be the Galloway successor, it seems like Sean is going, he's leapfrogged into the battle of the Galloway scions, right? It seemed like he's well ahead. So shout outs to him, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, because Orla's only 8 years old, and Sean is a graduate of one of Britain's top universities. He's been at my side politically, literally since he was 3 or 4 years old. He's been in all of my campaigns. And you brought me to tears laughing by commenting on his resemblance to Babyface Nelson, which I have always known, but never mentioned to him because I felt that he might take it askance. But Sean Galloway is a real star, and he's going to be a big name in the future. He's a young man in his early 20s with a great future ahead of him. And that was indeed his debut. He was a little bit nervous at first, but by the end, he was well into his stride. Ola never gets nervous. She has a voice that would cut steel, and has cut steel, and so she's never nervous. But by the time she's in her early 20s, she might be. It's normal to be nervous when speaking in public in front of a camera. The point is to keep on keeping on, to quote Bob Dylan. Well, you just proved all over again, Erebos, exactly why you are the legend that you are, and exactly why we always love to make you the last guest on the show. But now, here's the woman without whom the news wouldn't be the news. Here's Gayatri. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Right, a bit more about what you discussed earlier with our guest Kit Klarenberg, because only 27 years ago, on 25th of March 1999, NATO started their bombing campaign in Yugoslavia. And in 78 days non-stop, they rained down Yugoslavia with 28,000 bombs, included depleted uranium and cluster munitions. It killed over 2,000 civilians and displaced over 250,000 people. And it destroyed the infrastructure of Yugoslavia. It destroyed the country. It indeed destroyed the whole concept of that which was Yugoslavia, which under its leader Tito was a very successful socialist state, one of its own kind. Tito was one of the founding leaders of the non-aligned movement, akin to what the Indonesian president Sukarno had in the Asia-Africa conference in 1955. So this can't happen in the middle of Europe. So whilst the pretext of NATO was to protect civilians, the Muslim population to be precise, which later became the right responsibility to protect, this phrase, this mantra coined by Clinton and Blair, it was really just to destroy the concept, and with that the phrase balkanization was born. Ever since, this is what they're up to. NATO is all about balkanizing the whole world. And I remember us visiting these NATO bombing sites in Belgrade because they've left it as a living proof, because it was only 27 years ago. We visited the various sites, the Chinese embassy included, which has now become the Chinese Cultural Center. But the most significant one is, of course, the television station, which we can basically see through, where they killed tea ladies, as you said. And as we were walking past the memorial, I recall this elderly man with his grandson speaking little to no English, but he was curious as to why we were there, obviously foreigners. And when you revealed that you were British, oh, Tony Blair this, Tony Blair that, NATO, America, England, it's really still so fresh in the memories of the people in Serbia, this NATO bombing campaign. And I will not forget the expression and the real anger of this man of what was done to their country as a punishment for doing their own thing.
It is right to remember it. I've been thinking about it. Kit Klarenberg obviously has been thinking about it. You've been thinking about it. It is right to remember it, not just because we loved Yugoslavia, we loved its role in the world, we loved the idea of Yugoslavia, and I'm old enough to know that it was one of the most, perhaps East Germany was slightly more prosperous, but Yugoslavia was one of the most prosperous of the socialist countries, one of the most successful. It was one of the most innovative. You could say, as I've said before, when we visited Tito's grave, that Tito was China before China.
Yeah, ahead of its time.
It was ahead of its time. And the ideas of Tito are remarkably close to what the prevailing ideas in the People's Republic of China are now. If you ever get the chance to visit his tomb of him and his good wife, it's in the Museum of Yugoslavia.
Correct.
And is a very, very beautiful spot indeed. And so the point I'm making is, it's not just because we loved Yugoslavia. It's not just because they destroyed Yugoslavia. But as I said to Kit earlier, it is that this would be the shape of things to come. That the so-called responsibility to protect would become a license to kill, where international law is simply shredded and the big powers can decide to attack and destroy anyone, whomsoever they decide to dispense with. Change any regime, kill any leader, and pretend that they're doing it for the protection of civilians. I think it's been a great show tonight, and thanks for ending it on such a note. As I said, the audience is growing and growing exponentially, and I think we must be doing something right, but it's also because you're helping. It's also because you're financially contributing, and it's also because you're spreading the word. So if I may ask, I would like Sunday's show to be a bumper show. We'll know by then if Trump has invaded Iran or not, or whether we've been misjudging him and that his intentions were peaceful all along. The man that watches the Gorilla channel on American TV, but only the violent bits. He fast forwards the bits in between. It's been marvelous for me. I'm really glad that you came. 60,000 people voted in the poll this evening, and most of them think Donald Trump has already lost his Iran war. We'll see what happens by the weekend, God willing. See you Sunday. Good night.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.